Here comes badass Michael Curtis.
ZZ Top and all.
Get him.
What's up, Mike? What's happening, Mike?
Hey!
You're a little late, man. What's going on?
Well, god darn it, I just lost my sense of time out there. I've been living out in the canyon, come in here, take care of my mom in the morning.
Got a little delayed, huh? Well, we're going to do a little bit of an interview today. We're going to go to your backyard, visit your birds, your loft, and see what kind of stuff you've been hiding from the world. We're going to get at it right now.
Be discussing your secret theories, Mike. We're gonna have you all the way live on the tape.
Let's go. Let's hit the backyard now.
All right. My name's Michael Curtis, and I've been asked to give you a little bit of my outlook on the roller hobby and what I've done in the sport. And I go back to about late 50s. I had birds. I was born and raised on a commercial squab ranch, so pigeons were a big part of my life. My whole life, when I was a little guy, I had to get up and feed out the birds before I went to school in the morning, which was like 300 or 400 pounds of feed, and loading electric carts and everything else. And so pigeons have been a major influence and a part of my life. And I got involved with rollers early on and had all different types of breeds involved with show birds and birds in general and wildlife and falconry, and just been the whole gamut of wildlife and nature. And so that gives you a little background on what I'm about and where I'm at, and we'll just go on from here. I think John has.
Okay, Michael. Michael, how do you train your young bird kid?
Well, the way that I have trained my kid over the years, I've evolved little different methods. This is one area that you can certainly have a wide variety of different ways and all of them be successful. But I have probably evolved towards this kit box that we see right behind me here, which is a walk-in type of a kit box. Inside I have 4 different smaller hens inside. I have a training cage that's affixed on the outside. Here I have a lot of hawk problems throughout the winter, so that I can't fly year-round, which is a major disadvantage to getting any continuity and rhythm out of the kit birds, but you have to do what you have to do, and birds of prey just are just too dense in this area to try to fly through the winter. So I have to try to train them in and get them an early start. So I usually start flying at the end of February, depending on the weather, the storm. As soon as it warms up, then that's anytime after that I can start to get the birds up. They've been locked down for like 4 months, 5 months, 5.5 months sometimes, depending on the years. But this type of system lets me get the birds going because I can have them trained to come out and in. From here, I got a patio situation here, so that all I have to do when I want to train, put it here. I'll show you right here. The birds will. The birds can come out, and as you can see, I try to bring them out. I'll feed them a little bit up on top. As you can see, they know their way around quite easily that way. And I, of course, don't have any fears of hawk attacks when they're doing that. I get a little feed here.
What do you feed them, Mike?
I feed them
The young birds.
grain, a lot heavy on the Milo and a little millet in it, and tiny bit of mixed grain.
Can we take a closer view at what you give them, Michael?
Well, right now this here is
Get it close.
is Milo with a little millet in it. Sometimes I feed them just straight millet. Sometimes whatever's. I'm not that crazy wild. If the price runs way up, I might just get regular parakeet mix and use that to train them in and out. But say right now.
Michael, do you flag the young ones? I notice I don't see a flag here. You know, some people use it religiously. Do you use one?
Oh, he's got one.
Actually, I got an old feed bag hung on this stick right here, and I'll use that from time to time.
For the novices, what's the purpose of flagging? So we can get it in tape.
Well, actually, you can use the purpose of it several ways. You can help you to get them out of the kit box, particularly when you have a big walk-in kit box like I have. You can go in there, and it saves your back and stuff of getting down because they're a little bit more frightened of this cloth and stuff that they're not used to, so they will scamper out in a hurry. Of course, on the roof, after you have a young team in the air, you're starting to get them out. You can regroup them. You can they'll go all over the sky. They kind of get back up here on top. You got them a little bit hungry so that they have their attention on what you're doing, and then you can flag them up from there. You bring up the flag, and then that gets them continuity so that they all react the same at the same time. They get up, and they kind of teaches them to kit. And you can let them do that 2 or 3, 4 times, and that helps them quite a bit in their ability to get going with the procedures. Come on, you guys, come on down.
Mike, how long do you put up with juvenile delinquents? Birds that don't respond to training.
It can be any different. It depends on the what the bird itself. I have a grading system that I'm standing here trying to talk. I see a pigeon out back here right now. I think I better investigate it. We better maybe. All right. The system that I use for eliminating birds that don't come up to the standards is varied. I have a way of grading the birds coming out of the nest. This takes years of study, and I don't advise it for anybody right off, and it's more of a philosophy about the whole game in the long run anyway. But anyway, if a bird doesn't come up to certain criteria in the physical makeup of the bird, if it shows me any problems at all, I won't give him a second chance. All he's got to do is mess up the least little bit, and he's out. Another bird might have certain set of circumstances that I say, okay, he's not feeling good because his eyesight, or I'm looking at him in there, he's not healthy looking. He's had some problem because of other stresses that are put on other than just his natural being, so that I will give those birds more chances. Other types of habits and things that come along. In other words, sometimes it's your own fault, it's a fancier's fault when birds mess up. By leaving other birds in the team that are sitting on poles or doing this and that, obviously they're going to lead birds astray. So you have to evaluate each bird differently whenever something doesn't work out the way that you think they should. And like everything else in this sport, I usually have a wide variety of alternatives. I don't usually focus in on any one set of circumstances to deal with anything. It's always each case on an individual basis.
You say that it starts in the nest.
Right.
You now can discern by looking at a baby, knowing that, when there's strength there, probability and unprobability. Is that what you're saying? Like wings that maybe flap and legs spread out, just birds that are just too stunny in the nest, maybe too puny or not, you know what I mean?
Right. Right.
birds that don't seem to be picking up in weight and growing. They seem to be abnormal. Is this what we're talking about?
Well, yeah, and no. I mean, we're talking about.
I mean, we're talking about pertaining
We're
to the
talking about
nest.
right. I'm
Pertaining to the nest.
understanding that. Yeah,
Okay.
and that's I'm going to address you. What usually I'm not talking about a health problem. I expect a different result from different matings. Some matings are inbred matings that I sometimes will be satisfied with seeing a bird with weaker muscle development, a little more refinement. Other times, if I see that, I'm not looking for that, and I take it as a deficit. It isn't what I think should be there. But there is certain shoulder settings to the birds, the back of the bird, and certain things that I pick up even at a very young age. Head beak setting, head types. You can actually start to see these types when the birds are just weeks old before they even grow their feathers on, and
Very interesting.
so that you can study it. The one thing that happens with the babies, though, as they turn out and they come out, they either kind of bloom or not bloom. A lot of times they have a ton of potential, just like draft choices in the ball, and say our football. You got number one draft choices that turn out to be nothing, and the club will put $8 million or $10 million to sign them, and 2 or 3 years later, the man won't even be playing ball anymore. And that's kind of what happens here. You see great potential come out. It's there because the blood behind it almost forces it to begin, but the mental capabilities of the bird just don't develop. The inside parts basically just don't add up, and then you'll end up having a bird that I use the term does not bloom. It's all there. It should be, but it just doesn't really happen. So
It's interesting.
That's
real interesting.
That's how, and a lot of guys will say, well, you can't grade out of the nest, and that's part of the reasoning that you use. On the other hand, it's nice to grade out of the nest, have that bird be what you consider to be a high draft choice, number one round, and then see it come all the way along and become a Joe Montana or become
I get it.
An O.J. Simpson,
All right,
superstar of whatever given sport you're after.
That's a blockbuster. All right, Mike. Mike, when's the best time to fly?
Well, the very best time to fly, of course, is even actually about half an hour or so before the sun comes up. You get the birds up. In this part of the country particularly, the training and everything is so nice to get it started before the birds of prey and hawks come in on you. And so that is the number one time. But over a course of time, it's pretty nice to sometimes vary, to have late afternoon flies, and when you're training, you can fly 3 or 4 times a day, which has an overall effect in other ways. So,
do you practice flying them up to 2 to 3 times?
Sometimes when the kids are young, they can get flown that often. Then you go the other way. You go with older holdover kits where you don't fly them but every 3rd day or something too.
Once they come into the role, Michael, do you fly them every day?
Once they come into the role, you have to watch the kid coming into the role, and if the kid is really on a high note, when they're really starting to perform, then is when you have to try to either hold back individuals from time to time and you keep flying the team, or else rest the team from time to time, because when they're really working hard, like any athlete, they just can't go on indefinitely. Although I have seen a certain style of pigeon, a type of pigeon, that seems to have more, can take more punishment, and so I also look at that. I look at birds and I say, okay, this type of physique, this type of pigeon will be able to stay in a deep spinning mode and take the punishment better than another bird that might be what I like to term as the most revolutions per inch, or the most revolutions per foot, is one of my goals. And sometimes that is a bird that is a little bit too lightly loaded to take a lot of punishment. So it's always back and forth with me on mixing and matching the birds that seem to be able to have a lot of strength, and the other birds that are so lightly loaded and so delicate that they can't. But it's always a combination.
Let me ask you this question again. It's almost similar to what you're saying. Do you balance your 20 bird kit like, say for instance, 7 short, 7 medium, and 7 deep? Do you
It would be
you know
nice if I,
you know
if I
because
had
everything in my kit box rolls 60 foot. You know,
60 foot like a
60
bullet.
like a bullet. Do you practice? Do you
It would be
practice
nice
that?
if I had that many birds at my disposal of all the different lengths and sizes and speeds to just place a team out there. A lot of times in our dreams we can dream about that, but in reality we have to kind of make up the team with what we got. Obviously, if you're in kit competition, you can't have too many deep birds, but I like to see a good deep pigeon, and I wouldn't. I've never had the luxury of being in a position to just say I'm going to have so many of this and so many of that.
Do you train your old bird kit the same as you train your young ones?
Well, there'd be a lot of differences.
Elaborate on that, Mike.
Some of the differences, of course, would be the amount of times up. Young birds are going to have to be fed more and flown more often. There's a certain time frame in there where you want the birds to fly a long time. I like to have them up flying close to an hour at a certain point in time in their development, so that they can meet their maker, so to speak, so that they can build up and be able to deal with this affliction that's going to come over them.
Do you use any type of vitamin or minerals?
I have on occasion, and it seems like going back and forth between this and that is what gives you the best benefits. Always just running them solid on something. In the long run, I've phased back off. I just kind of have the old, go back to the old Mother Nature theory of strongest survive, and I want to work out of the basic. I want it to be something that's there and solid. I don't want it to be drug induced. I don't want it to be birds that are so delicate they can't breed without having help from any other sources. So I like to have things close to natural grains and stuff like that too.
What about grit?
Grit is something that seems that can stay in their system a long time, so that if I give them grit, most commercial grits have a lot of salt in them, so that they like the taste of salt, and they'll come down there and certainly mac down on the tasty salt. But the grit will stay in there for quite a long time. So if they get grit, they actually get grit in the pellets. Pellets, people that produce pellets obviously can throw rocks in there at a pretty cheap rate and get the weight of what they need out of the sack. So you know you're going to get a certain amount of grit when you buy pellets, and that's already in there. But I do put out grit every now and then.
So you feed pellet to your young birds in the breeding pen?
I feed pellets every now and then. Usually I'll come by in the morning at about 9, 10 o'clock in the morning, and I will put some pellets out for the birds to snack on all day long. Hopefully feed some of the birds that have a little problem here or there, whatever. The pellets are like pablum. It's easy digestible, and it sets them up. Then I go back to grain in the afternoon main feed, and overnight they have regular mixed grains.
Michael, to get back to the center point, what do you consider an ideal kit bird?
Man, oh man, how much tape have we got here?
We got a lot of tape.
We got a lot of tape.
A lot of tape. An ideal kit bird is a bird that is actually not any one pigeon. To me, it can't be encompassed. The
or
art
an ideal
form
kit,
is too.
or an ideal kit.
Well, the art form, we're just too. It's just too diverse, and I like a lot of different things, and not any one pigeon or one ideal can hold it all to me. Obviously, we need to have birds that spin as fast and as tight as we can to get them. I like the floating motion to the spin, where the birds have hang time, look like they drop much slower, more of a dreamy thing. To me, that's where they start to shrink and start to actually turn smooth. And instead of using the words velocity or a lot of times in this part of the country they'll use the word the bird's cranking, or they'll use some violent thing. When the birds are really hitting it, what I like is you lose impressions of violence, and you just see smooth, ghostly-like image, soft, and you use a whole different terminology for the ultimate, I think. But the ideal kit bird, I don't know. I like very deep birds. I like
Short
frequent
ones.
pigeons. I like different things, but it can't be encompassed. And I don't think that you can maintain a family of birds with only one little ideal there. It just doesn't fix that way. The role does not fix. The role is always something that's evasive, and we have to kind of sneak up on the role to get it to happen. My approach to
So a bird that rolls 5 feet or 2 feet that just floats and spins in the air so fast, that can be an ideal spinner for you?
Well, actually, I found that until the birds get over about 8 feet deep, they can be false prophets. They can look really nice when they begin, just they're beginning flipping, but sometimes they get tangled up in themselves once they start to come down more than I say, about 8 to 10 feet. Once they get past 8 to 10 feet, then you can have a really ideal spinner. But shorter than that they can kind of be false. So I like to see at least that deep.
You know, I never even use the word feet anymore. What I like to use is 1 yard, because sometimes when you say 1 foot, it sounds ridiculous, but 1 yard, it's 3. What is it?
3 feet.
3 feet. And once you get into the, say, 3 to 4 to 5 yards, that's when you begin to take note. I mean, a 2-footer, a 3-footer, that's ridiculous.
That's why I said
But,
the human mind likes to add to it.
Yeah,
So in other words,
yeah.
when you see a bird go short, you can imagine the bird rolling at some fantastic velocity, and it's such a quick, fleeting moment. So the human mind's eye, the birds that I consider to be shorter pigeons are birds that are maybe up to 15 feet and shorter. Over 15 feet becomes medium range, 15 to possibly 20, around 25 or something, and then the deeper birds will be from 25 to 35 or 40 feet, and then of course deeper than that. I again don't put a lot of emphasis on the importance of one versus the other. Obviously, that short birds are more dominant to deep birds, and genetically, when you go to breed them, that you can breed 2 short birds together and certainly get a deep bird out of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in the stock loft, and when I take these birds down out of the air, I really don't focus in a lot on that, the differences. I've seen deep birds that are able to maintain distances up to approaching 200 feet in a kit for a year at a time, 2 years at a time, personally, and roll, they're not too frequent of a pigeon, but they'll only roll 1 or 2 times out and be able to roll like that for a long time. And so sometimes a deep bird can get away with it, but as far as maintaining the highest class of spin, that's up to each one of us to understand what the highest class of spin is. To each one of us is something different. Just like to each one of us, we like a different type of a person to be with, and we look for different traits in human beings. And I think this is what happens here, is that we look for different things, and I personally like to see the variety. I don't have any one idealistic depth or idealistic type that I think is absolutely that I focus in on and try to so-called clone in the stock loft. I believe that again, that this is not located on any single gene. You can't just stamp them out. I think you have to go back and forth between all the above, and I think it's important to keep deep birds involved. I think we can get too focused in on the classy medium range pigeon that is super fast. That's obviously one of our greatest goals, but I think that the deep pigeons have a lot to offer to the genetic makeup of the length of the fit versus the violence of the fit or the velocity of the fit. And so I just have a lot of room for many different styles.
Pensum wrote about beyond 9 yards, the reliability, velocity will slowly diminish after, even in the greatest of pigeons. Do you hold that to be true?
Yes, I'd have to go along with that. I've seen deep birds maintain some speed and even on occasion roll very deep and end up maybe with the last so many feet of the roll being the fastest part of it, even stretching 60 feet or even 80 feet. But we're talking about maintaining a consistent rolling pattern. I definitely would have to come back because, again, understanding what the ultimate velocity and speed is, and again, this is all, nobody can sit here and look at the camera in the eye and try to relate to you how fast a bird can roll. It's only going to be your personal experience and what your mind's eye can drink in. There's a lot of people will never be able to really see certain things in the air. They just are not capable of seeing. Not everybody's capable of playing a piano. Not everybody's capable of doing a lot of things in the art form, part of our existence. And that's part of it here. So everybody looks in the eye in the sky and they see a different thing when that image comes in through their lens into their mind. It comes in and the mind filters it in different directions. So some people are easily settled at a different level. Other people aren't satisfied with that, and they keep looking and investigating more and more. So it's hard to put that in words exactly. How to tell somebody what speed, what to look for, what really is fast and what isn't. But if you really understand the ultimate high velocity, and I can only go with my mind's eye on this, is that you can't get too much deeper than what Pensum said to be able to maintain that ultimate speed.
Michael, to throw this into what you're saying, pertaining to pigeons rolling short, medium, and deep, Michael, would you breed out of a non-spinner?
Sure would. Matter of fact, I even enjoy the fantastically built non-spinner. It can carry a lot of traits that we need into a family. Yes, very much so.
Mm-hmm. Michael, since we're on the topic of flying and stuff like that, when a pigeon doesn't have the requirements, for a breeder, what do you do with those birds that after a while, that don't have, that they're good kid birds or whatever, but maybe they're not champions or whatever. What do you do with that?
Again, I have a overall criteria that I look at the birds, and again, the air input is only a certain thing that it's an important part of evaluation and what to look for and use as your determination on what you're going to do with the pigeon, either leave it in the kid or breed out of it or whatever. But I don't that isn't the whole ends to the means to me. And so I like the idea of evaluating the birds, and sometimes a bird that's just a good solid bird I might want to use in my breeding program, particularly cockbirds. I've had cockbirds that were just nice, clean, rolling pigeons. Maybe not the very fastest pigeon, but a very dependable pigeon. And when I put it down on the ground and I see certain qualities to the wing shapes, I look a lot into the wing. The wing is a precursor, a thing that is going to maybe give you an idea of what's to come, like eye sign is. So I I look at certain things, and if they have some things going for them, I'll definitely breed out of them. And I've had some outstanding stock cocks that weren't my fastest pigeon, but turned out to be producers of very fast pigeons.
How long do you fly them? How long do you fly them? I guess that's what I was trying to
Well,
say. I got
here
thrown
in
off my horse.
this area,
Here, how long do you fly them before you move them into? Before you say, hey, you know what? I'm going to give that bird
it
a chance
depends.
in the stock
Again,
loft.
just like everything else with me, everything else I do with the birds.
That's because you're because of the understanding you have. You can move them in any time.
Different times, all different. Some birds are going to be. They're going to have to prove themselves 3 or 4 times to me, because I'm suspect of this or that, and so they're going to have to stay in there and do the job. Other birds, I will take a chance on. Other birds I will take out. Again, I'm in a very hawk-ridden area here, so that I have to close down my flying completely. In October sometimes, and so that I have to make a decision whether I want to try to put the bird back out, what I'm going to do with it. So sometimes I make a decision to hold it back. Other times I'm working on some kind of genetic project. I'm trying to do something, and years ago I used to think, okay, I want to see the bird spin at least every other generation. In other words, I might pull a bird in before it came into the roll and breed out of it, as long as I bred offspring off it that were very outstanding birds in the air, then I'd go ahead. But anymore, I don't care if I see the spin every generation or not. I might breed 2 or 3 generations without worrying about seeing what I want to see, set it up, knowing genetics, knowing what I know. I try to again sneak up on the roll.
Once you made a statement to me on the way to Apple Valley to visit Jim Lippincott. You said, you go ahead and take the champions out of my kit box, and I'll take those that are not spinning, that are brothers and sisters that haven't come into the roll, and you take those 2 birds that are spinning, cock and hen, and I'll take the 8, 9 that are not in the roll, and I'll breed a few seasons, and I'll whip the tailbone right off your back. You remember you said that?
Yeah, I said that, and I still believe it pretty much.
And elaborate on that.
I still believe on it. Well,
because I really like that. That's where me and you left off before we got divorced. We're trying to reconcile here.
How much alimony? It is an absolute deal. I mean, it's not that the spinners can't also produce very outstanding birds and work in it, but sometimes the bird that's spinning has a little bit this or that isn't in a line as good as I'd like to see. I like to see a little certain type of muscle pattern, a drop keel to the front. I like to see that cut to the keel, where the bird has a waist, and I see certain what I call roll dynamics that come out. And when I see a bird that has these roll dynamics, even though the bird itself is not in the spin yet, or even if it is in the spin and is just a good roller, not an exceptional roller, I know that there's some other factor inside that hasn't linked up to maybe produce the ultimate bird. But these physical features of the bird are set up for maybe some of the best spinning, so that a bird that's rolling up there, it might be rolling excellent, but it might have a little bit of problem with its disposition. It might be a little bit wound up and tight looking, and I know that can lead to problems too. So that's why I say that sometimes a bird that hasn't come in the roll yet, I'll go ahead and pick it out and take a chance on it. Who knows, it'll probably come in 2 or 3 years, and I'll just go ahead and breed out of it. As we know, as I know, the roll is not fixed, so I don't get tangled up into worrying about trying to fix any ideal thing, as far as every bird trying to be a 30-footer or every bird trying to be a 15-footer.
Yeah. So the champion spinner,
like
can have lax, and it'll show itself in the stock loft.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And another thing
That's
is
not every champion spinner could be a good reproducer, because it may lack. It doesn't lack anything in the air, but it may lack
Well,
the government
part of that's
lacks some things
the fancier lacks.
for the stock lot.
The fancier lacks the knowledge to know how to work them. Again, when you just inbreed, and nothing else, you can actually be losing the very traits you're trying to cultivate, because the recessives take over and you lose certain more dominant traits to those recessive traits, and they'll never come back. So when you just relentlessly inbreed, you think you're keeping them pure, but actually you're doing the opposite. You're losing you're losing genes all over the place, like trying to cup water in your hand. It's hard to do it, and it rolls out, and it slips out, and that's what happens.
Michael, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to add one other little point that I wanted to put on to what I was talking about with
Go ahead.
with the spin. The birds that I don't believe that the roll fixes, and even fixes within one pigeon, even an ideal pigeon that you think is the very best bird you've bred in several years or whatever. If you follow that bird year in and year out for several years in the air, you will see that bird changes its frequency up, it changes its depth up, it'll back off, it'll come on. Again, to me, the roll does not fix. The roll is, so I don't worry about trying to pick out an ideal single pigeon, thinking that I'm going to make two pigeons together to just keep this, to fix some trait to the roll. I don't believe it works that way, and so I've been on that level, or that path for quite a while.
You mentioned something pertaining to inbreeding. I know you mentioned something pertaining to the bad that can happen in inbreeding, but what are the benefits?
The benefits
in
of inbreeding
and line breeding
the benefits are
for the
the greatest
novices
thing. The
to
greatest.
understand.
It's the thing you have to do to fix. If you're going to develop a line or leave a mark behind, say you're dead and gone, and you want your birds to last a while, like Mr. Pinson did in this part of the country anyway, his birds are still responsible for a lot of the good things that happens here in the air still. You have to fix certain traits, and the only way to fix those traits is to inbreed them. And I'm talking about all traits, either mental or physical traits, so that when you inbreed, you're fixing, you're setting it more in stone. Let's use that term, so that it repeats itself. So inbreeding is the only way that you can do that. But at the same time, you're inbreeding good things, you're inbreeding bad things, and that's why this thing is such a frustrating sport, because it is probably, I consider, to be the most, I know I'm going to offend people out there that are breeding racing homers or dogs or horses or something else, but I really believe that trying to cultivate a high standard of individual speed rollers for the individual qualities is probably the most difficult small animal to breed because of this. Because when we go to breed, at the same time we're breeding for these points, we're also pulling in negatives at the same time and lining them up. So it's always kind of a meeting in the middle. That's why I'm always talking about mixing and matching, or you can't just go fastest to fastest. You can't go the normal way that you'd think would be the easy way to do it. It's very difficult to try to figure out how you can come in the back door on this thing.
What are the benefits of blending different families together, outcrossing?
The benefits.
Do you prefer that over inbreeding? Or it's just
how
the balance
far we're
of the
really
two?
outcrossing is a very interesting thing. When we talk about outcrossing, a lot of times the birds really go back to a source that is common. Even though we think we're outcrossing, it might not be as much of an outcross as we think. Mm-hmm. Even though for the last 4 or 5 generations they've been
putting a Plona to Smith,
right?
Like saying
Smith,
that's
right.
an outcross.
That's an outcross. Exactly.
Putting a Lemar back on the Pensenberg, that's an outcross.
Exactly.
I won't have no 255 in my birds, and yet 255
right.
and 514 are
exactly
related.
And they're exactly related. And same with the clay hen and a lot of other birds.
I won't mix no clay hen in my birds because I have 578 in my birds. Same thing.
And I know when I first met you, John, you were really on a lot of those numbers and.
Well, I think everybody rode that train.
And
not to put myself in the red there.
And as a matter of fact, I probably shook your tree a little bit on that. And it's taken some years for you to digest me slapping you back and forth a little bit with the knowledge. But you know, I really wonder just how much of an outcross we have when the role of the whole pigeon has to emanate from just a couple of rare occurrences and how man first came in on it. So outcrossing is probably there's hardly to be just an outcross. It's really line breeding to more intense line breeding is what you were talking about.
So the novices can understand, okay? Because there's going to be a lot of novices that look at this.
No novices, no novices.
What do you practice and what do you prefer? I mean, I understand what you meant when you said, you know, the birds are very much, you know, we you know, like Smith and Plona. You know, there's a lot of people that say, oh, that's a hybrid or whatever. But like you said, you know, the birds are very much related, where it's not really it's not really an outcross. It's actually line bred, inbred. But what do you? I mean, I understand also that you try different lines together, and you don't really consider it a hybrid. It's all line bred. But what do you practice? I mean, do you practice inbreeding, like father to daughter, grandfather to grandson? You know, do you practice close breeding, or do you prefer the outbreeding? You know, of the line bred, inbred families. We have understanding of
Let
what
me
you
tell
do
you,
here.
first of all, novices have, a lot of times, you novices out there have a lot of advantages, because sometimes there's a lot of barnacles on us old guys that we lock up on certain things, and unless we have an open mind and re-investigate some of the subjects that we look into and draw conclusions on, a lot of times we're using bad information or bad tactics. And so as a novice, you come in and you have a nice clean slate, you have none of these biases stuck anywhere in you, so that you can go at something with a really open mind. And as you get into it, it's important for you to meet different people, but I think that's the key, is to meet a number of people like this tape is doing. It's going to let you listen to different people, and if you have the type mind that is going to be able to ferret out all the different facets and bring together what works good, then you personally are going to be the one that will have more on the ball in a very short time than some old guy that's been in the sport for 20, 30 years. So I think that the term novice can be a benefit here, and so you know, how are we gonna start this?
Well, now we're gonna start viewing the inside of Michael Curtis's kit box. I've never seen one like this before in all my life.
Well, this thing's got a lot of bells and whistles on it and everything. I have for the training purposes, this thing's down. Then when I want to fly my birds, I just lift this up, and they can come in through here, and then I can lower the other side here and leave birds out up in this area to bring young birds back to home, young birds back into the kit box, and I can feed extra birds that need a little extra feed in this area, and just has a lot of versatility to it.
Did you see this?
Water.
Did you see this idea somewhere else out there?
This is all my own idea.
This is all your own.
This is all out of my imagination.
This is nice.
So
Creative mind of a Birmingham
yeah,
roller man.
Doing all these angles and everything in there worked out really nice. It was kind of hard at first figuring it out. And, you can see in there, we got 4 different
Compartments?
Yeah. With the perches on the back. The ones on the top are a little bit wider across the bottom, and as they go down a little narrower, so that you can try to keep the birds nice and clean. And you got the little patio area in here that you can also use as separating birds up as far as when they drop, or when you might have part of the kit come down early, so you put them up and you put them in there, and then you can feed And you can feed them, and then you can leave some feed down here for the other birds, or just gives you a whole lot of versatility on working the birds and getting to get the most out of them by having the different ways that I can shut them in this area, or to work them back and forth through the traps. When part of them are flying, I can have one kit. I actually have a little thing there where I can be training one kit in and out up on top and be flying the other kit, which they can drop in through the drops. I decided to go with the drops here, just the good old country boy way of just where instead of just wood and making it, I can close it up so the cats
Can't get in.
can't get in at night if I want. That easy, and so and I can put it right there. When I'm training, I can lift this up back and forth again. If I want to show somebody, I can pull these outside walls down and put birds in there to show somebody, or to feed them extra, feed them a little extra or whatever. Or again, I got this inside area also that I can do that with. There's the baby kit. I can close the baby kit up. I have them access extra there.
Boy,
like
this
that.
thing moves all the way around.
Yeah.
Michael, can we get you
I got-
to display a few probable future stars?
Well, we
and
can
have
do
you
that.
come into the
We
roll
can do that.
from your kit box?
We can do that. Let me,
We'll come back in 6 months and we'll find out if you're full
I'll-
of beans or not.
I'll put this down.
Full of
right
steak or
here.
beans.
I'll put this down right here, and put this down.
So having a bigger fly pen doesn't matter to you. A lot of guys are going that small, compact style, 4x4 or 2x2.
Stuck out here in a hawk-infested area, I've kind of give up on trying to spend a lot of time trying to win kit competitions. I'm after just developing the rollers and individual spin, and so I'm not so focused in on just winning kit competitions anymore. If you were, maybe some of the details that they've done with really compact and all that might make a small difference, but I would rather explore the genetics and how that works more than.
So you don't seem to notice much difference in flying in a bigger kit loft?
Over a period of time, I really don't. Again, my major focus though is on the individual spinners, and not so much as a total group. But I would say that it's fleeting. That certain kits, when they're on, when they start to come in, and when they're really peaking as a kit, as a total kit, I've seen it happen just as much in an open big pin and a small kit box too. So to think that you got a great advantage by flying them in a really tight, compact area and everything, I've never really. I've designed, I've made small kit boxes, and I've had all the different ones, and again, this works for me because of what I'm after. The room I got here, I got a little room, and I'm more worried about trying to get the birds in a routine and stay away from as many hawk attacks as I can, and so this works for me.
You got 2 doors on that.
Yeah.
You're gonna bring out a few future.
Yeah, I'll bring out a couple of birds.
Pete,
Bring
and
'em
I'll
out.
show
I
you how
need you to
this
get a
works.
closer shot of these
And
birds.
the second door on this one is for the baby section over there. I go in and out
gonna
and
bring
put
'em out right
babies
here.
in. But I'll put
gonna
a
bring 'em
couple
out.
of my future, what I think will be future superstars in here.
Okay.
How long ago did you build this loft?
Come again?
How long ago did you build this loft?
I've had this loft now for about 3 years, I think. It's close to it. I guess about 3, maybe 4 years. I don't know. Just to look good on the camera, not necessarily in any sense that this is my number 1 pick or anything, but this is a bird that I got a lot of hope for. But we'll just set him up in here. He should come across really nice with the being a badge mark bird. If not in the air, that bird right now has a lot going for it. But again, they have to get adult, and then we'll reevaluate them when they're adult. At this age here, they're just good prospects.
Evaluating them as kit birds
As kit birds,
and stock birds. We're going to get into later on.
yeah, right. But right now, they're a bird that I watch. That if
Rising stars.
right, but
Potential.
potential, and you have to keep an open mind on that. You can't let pedigree. You can't let because it's out of the old champion or anything else really affect it. Yes, you see certain physical things there, and you see certain eye signs already developing. Feather quality. I look for a hard and soft feather. I look for the shape and the thickness of the feather and different things to the feather, a lot to the feather. Again, the feather is also another indicator of good things to come or bad things to come. And so I kind of look at that. But I like to see the bird. I mean, bird has to have all this and can have all this. But unless it all comes together, and you won't really know that until the bird gets a year and a half old. And they'll even keep blooming up until they're about 4 or 5 years old, where they'll start to maybe look their very best. Everything, their eye sign, everything will come in tune. Their eye sign really doesn't truly develop until they do get 4 or 5 years old, but actually if you study it, you'll see a lot of good sign when they're young, and you'll kind of project it out. But you have to be careful because sometimes the inner parts of the bird aren't there, and the eye sign will just stop. It won't bloom.
That's interesting.
So let me grab another bird. Another bird that I feel good about.
Hey, Mike, what's the oldest bird you ever had in the kit bin, flying around?
Oh heck, man, I don't know.
You hit me with 5 years right now. I was wondering if do you fly birds for 5 years?
Actually, I probably end up with quite a few birds. I'm have so many guys come over and hit me up that it's hard for me to keep good birds in my kit for that long, and
They're in demand all the time.
right. So I end up not being able to keep them in my kit that long. But what happens every now and then, I'll pull an older bird out that I've been breeding out of, and I'll put it back in the air, and so I have done that with birds that are 7, 8 years old.
Do they adjust pretty well
but
from the breeding pen?
The type bird that
the kit
type bird that I breed for, I take that as a plus. I really look for that. I want a bird that has that stability. Some birds I put away to breed out of aren't that way. I mean, I sometimes I'll breed out of a bird that's a little too much. So I won't even try to put that bird back up.
Oh, I understand.
I might breed out of a bird that's real frequent, or I might breed out of a bird that's occasional bouncer. If I think that everything else is in order and it has something to offer for where I'm at and what I'm going for.
Yeah, birds do get heavy.
But
after
some
get
birds,
heavy too.
some birds, I fully want them to come right back into the kit and to fly. And I find that sometimes I'll put them back up, and almost immediately they'll go right to the kit and fly and roll even the first day, almost like they were when I took them out.
All the time.
Now, other times, some birds will take a couple of weeks to come back into the spin and to really get solid in the kit.
Get back in shape.
Get back in shape. And that's something else that's genetic and something that I do look for. And there's a difference between the birds that are just born always fit, always like they're in flying condition, and other birds that seem to have to be conditioned into the best condition.
I remember you used to elaborate also on titanium built. Remember, titanium is real. It's not heavy metal.
Yeah, but it's strong.
It's
one piece. It's strong. It's got a buoyancy to it, and that type of bird is to me the kind of the highest order.
The ones that can go back up into the air after breeding season.
Right.
Because some birds do get a little heavy.
I mean,
I know they can lose it, but
sometimes not.
Sometimes they get a little stocky,
most of the stuff I've been telling you is hearts and flowers. This here is real information maybe to some of you right now. Some of the birds that get heavy are the birds that can take more abuse, more punishment. Sometimes, and this is only through knowledge of flying birds over many years and studying other people's birds, knowing other people's bloodlines. But again, in my opinion, some of the birds that are that can take the abuse in the air and punishment are the birds that gain a little weight after you stalk them out. But again, I'm not saying that that's the type bird that necessarily can get you the most revolutions per inch, but it is the type bird that still you should look at when you want to.
What year was that? What year was that when you started talking titanium built?
Oh man. Actually,
For the record.
Actually, for you, we talked about titanium. I don't know, 6-7 years ago, but actually I used the term much earlier than that with another fancier. We were talking about type a guy by the name of Jose that I knew back in the late 70s, early 80s. We started talking that talk then, and
I know you were talking aerodynamics way before the Kowalski book.
well, there's a difference between aerodynamics and roll dynamics, and
yeah, that's what I'm saying. Roll dynamics.
right,
You were talking dynamics.
exactly.
Could you say that again, Reyes?
Well, Michael was talking about, like he said, body dynamics and rolling dynamics,
Air manners,
air manners, and the proper type, the body balance and the dynamics.
and there's a difference between right and left to the birds. Again, I believe that the roll is something that's involved with the nervous system of the pigeon, and so that there's a difference between the right and left side of the bird. And I've done some experimenting with that.
All kinds of stuff. Huh?
Right, and so it's interesting. It's really interesting to see which way, what wing they're on when they're rolling. I've seen some kits that do it reverse, but most of the time, if they're on their right wing, that means turning to the right. They roll better than when they're turning to the left.
There's all kinds of stuff, huh?
Yeah.
All kinds of theories. But anyway, Michael, can you bring out a few more birds?
Let's bring out a couple more. Let's bring out a couple more probable superstar. All right, now Reyes here has pumped me up about elaborating a little bit more on what we were talking about roll dynamics, fly dynamics, whatever. Flying dynamics is what any bird uses to fly. I'm talking about a hummingbird or other birds that make their living in the air, like birds of prey. You can study certain qualities to the wing, to feather, to a lot of different stuff. Eye sign even equates over to a lot of these different birds. And believe it or not, you can learn from a lot of other species besides pigeons, and you can take it back. Well, that's flying dynamics. But when we get into roll dynamics, the roll dynamics, of course, has to do with just the roller and what it takes to be able to maintain and put out a good spin, a quality of spinner. And one of the things that I got involved, thought was very important with, was the back structure of the bird and how the back and the shoulders and particularly the shoulders and how the length to the depth to the muscle package is the finishing touches that really lets your hands feel the shape. And like playing a piano or practicing, after a while you get used to your hands of feeling for certain things when you get a pigeon and judge a pigeon. You have to get a bird to relax and get into a certain have a certain what I want to say, dependability. He wants to depend on you and not being to hurt him or anything, and so that he will show himself to you, and then you can evaluate a bird. If he's struggling against you and upset, then you can't really evaluate him. And you really can't fully evaluate a pigeon until you've actually picked him up and studied him for a couple of weeks. But when you go to a show or when you are put on the spot, you can make a pretty good guess. Usually the first time of assessing a pigeon, you can usually get, I'd say 70%, probably be able to read the pigeon. Sometimes the birds are hard to read for whatever reasons, and sometimes it's you yourself aren't able to be very intuitive that day. Okay, the one thing about the keel is that the keel has to be in balance with the back, so that everything starts with the back. Then the keel is, that tells you how long the keel can be, can tell you how shallow or how much cut to the keel we want. I like to get the bird to cut up here to the back so that we get a waist, what I call a waist right here on the bird. But I'm not going to get into deep onto that. We could probably fill a half of a tape just on that. But
Layman.
Johnny wanted me to talk a little bit more about what I thought about this, and that I have been talking about this since I don't know, the 70s. I was involved with the back and talking about wing, and several of the prominent fanciers and I had quite a few conversations about it here.
A picture says a million words, Pete.
All right, this here's a young cock, maybe about 3 months old. It's already showing nice eye sign. It's the type bird. It's got a little different, what I call more the hummingbird setting to the head and beak area. Kind of comes more straight out on the bird a little bit, cut to the eye a little bit like that. But this here is that little young cock, little red bar cock. Let me see. I'll grab another one here.
The hummingbird.
Roll them.
Roll them. All right. Here's another young cock bird. We'll put it up in here to show off the little show cage, show you what a young bird. Again, this bird's probably only about 2.5 months old, I guess. Here, it's a young cock. This is what I call more of an open pattern, like the classic racing homer pattern, where it's an open blue check pattern. I really like to have the patterns involved, the basic backbone of the bar pattern involved somewhere genetically. I think there's certain things that are connected with that genetically to the mix, that are hidden traits that go back to the core of what the animal's all about. So I like to see certain mixture of patterns, and same thing with eye sign. You know, the talk about what all the different eye sign. I like to see a light white eye or gravel eye. I like to see it heavily involved. I like to see almost any mating that you would make would have the potential at some point of producing a pearl-eyed pigeon. Doesn't have to be that way, but I like to see the white eye as the basis in a family of birds.
All right.
So
okay, man, let's fly birds.
Let's fly birds.
I was going to take some of these out, but just to fly them out the door, I guess I could try to like this right now. Okay, I might as well raise this up. These guys go out. Here's where you can use your flag. You can walk in here.
How old is this? How old are the birds up that you're flying?
Well, I have a
Couple of months.
Birds up in here that are last year's birds to help train these babies. Again, I've had these guys locked in for a number of months. The older ones are all from last year, but I mean, even the babies have been locked in here for 2 months. They were born the first of the year. This being March, they're already been locked in because of hawk problems. So it's a hard way to go. I would have liked to had them up flying quite a long time ago, but again, I can't. So I have to try to do it this way. So they're a little bit more stubborn, a little harder to mess with. These birds have only been out about 6-8 times. This is only, like I said, only about the 6th time that any of them been out, and already there's a good portion of them kidding up there. There's probably about six birds up there that are older pigeons, and the rest of those are all all babies.
Michael, let me ask you this question again since you have the birds in the air. I mean, when do you cull from the air? I mean, when do you say enough with that juvenile delinquent?
Sometimes it's immediate. Again, I'll just
immediate.
say immediate. Some of these birds right now that are
But
down
pertaining
here.
to grace, how long will you work? I know
Well, sometimes
you have a
I'll
lot
work
of birds.
a long time. Sometimes I'll work a long time.
You know what I mean? For the novices to understand, because
right.
maybe they only bought 5-6 pairs.
But it's a hard question. It's a hard question because each time that something is wrong, what are they doing? Are they just not kidding? Are they flying? I mean, flying outside flying, or are they landing on poles? Why and what fors? If I pick them up, if they're not kidding right, let's say they're not kidding right.
After a while.
Well, whatever. Maybe they never kit right. Maybe they went like right now. These birds are trying to get up in there.
These are young ones.
These are babies. These are babies.
They have to be like that.
Right. Exactly. But you're saying okay.
Yeah,
let's say you had a kit going, and then one of them started to have problems maintaining the kit.
Man, I mean, how long do you put up with it?
When a bird starts to come into the roll, sometimes he will go through a spell for a couple of weeks, and so it's a very usual scenario to believe that the bird will go through a transition period where it might have trouble maintaining the kit, might be out for a couple of weeks, and then he will finally pull himself back up into the kit and be good. So I have a grace period, but again, I'll look at the bird. If I think the bird is got a deficient body type, I mean he's real weak. His keel is to the back, and he's kind of gaunt, and I feel like he's been getting his share of the food. Bam, he's gone. He's out.
He's out the door.
He's out the door.
He's
out the door.
You don't put up.
I don't put up with it. I don't. Other times, if it's just lagging behind the kit and he's showing me spinning, trying to spin, I might put up with it. I might let him go for a while. But each case is different.
Michael, since the birds are in the air and stuff like that, let's talk a little bit more. Color factor pertaining to roll. Eye sign color. Pearl eye, orange eye. Do some colors possess more role than the other colors?
I think
what is your understanding of that?
I think that you'll find in some families when birds are inbred and some families are closely inbred, you'll start to find some colors, some patterns starting to deteriorate. Maybe recessive reds, maybe blue bars, maybe something else will start to show a certain pattern. But that is in just one man's family, and I generally take it as a flaw. I mean, as the guy's whole family is starting to get into trouble, because I believe that actually all the colors should be involved. And if for some reason all of the certain ones are rolling down or not being able to maintain, then I think that the family is starting to lose. The whole family is starting to lose something genetically. So that's why I say that.
Okay. Have you noticed in your family of birds, or the families that you work, pearl eye being more dominant to roll than your orange-eyed family, or your orange-eyed family being more dominant to roll than your pearl-eye family, or it's just varies?
Well, on this point here, I really over a period of my life working with the birds, I really believe that there is something connected with the light eye, the white eye, with the pigeons. I think it goes back to the original rootstock of the birds were pearl eye or white eye at one time, and that the orange-eyed birds have something to offer, but I don't think you can really base a whole family off of just solid orange-eyed birds. I like to see the gravel eye, the white eye, and it seems to be connected with strong flying and good air manners. A lot of the birds that roll the best do have the pearl eyes, or are the hottest ones, but it's a reverse trend. I believe that, or a flip-flop, that actually you look at it and you say, well, the birds are hotter, so-called hotter, that have the pearl eyes, but they're just the ones that are demonstrating what we're after. And I really believe that the gravel eye is the basis to work around, and that we can bring in orange eye to just keep everything.
Do you mix coloration?
Definitely.
You know, when it comes to breeding.
Definitely.
When you breed,
I really, that is one of the things that I think is very important, that some information has been put out in the past about having birds that are just you know, one that it's up to the guy to inside to. In other words, the birds, that I can make a whole pen of whites roll any way I want to, or I can make a whole pen of blacks roll any way. I challenge that type of thinking. I really believe that again, we got to go back to the core of what this creature's all about, and the bar factor was something involved at the very beginning, and by keeping the pattern, bar patterns involved, and T pattern, and some of the patterns, and a mixture back and forth of those is the very best way to maintain a family, and in the long run, the only way to maintain a family. If you were to scan through Pinson's book,
we're talking about color factor.
We're talking about color factor.
Feather color now.
We're talking feather color. We're talking about just feather color now.
I was going to ask you three of them. Eye color, feather.
Right.
Feather
Okay.
color.
Well, I'm just talking about feather color.
Okay,
now
we're moving into feathers.
If you were to scan through Pinson's book, I don't know how many pictures he has in there, 30 pictures, or how many pictures he has in there. You're going to find quite a variety of color and patterns, but you're going to see that the bar pattern is represented in there in a good way. There's probably at least a third of them, or something that's either grizzle bar, blue bars, some bar pattern involved. And I really believe that the bar pattern is something that goes back again to the original rootstock, the old rock pigeon. Go back is where it started from. So there's some athletical abilities that are hidden in the gene mix in the pool that are going to follow the gravel eye, pearl eye, or the bar pattern. Those patterns are important to intermix in there, because it's not just the color of the feather. There's hidden gening clumps of genes come together, and you're going to get that to come out when you get to those colors.
Light versus dark.
There is a correlation there to the old sayings that the dark is more later, and the way Pinson put it down, a little bit more harder to maybe fly a little longer, a little harder to work with in the long run, let's say, versus a light-colored pigeon, or what they call gay pigeons. You know, again, mixing back and forth is always the answer to me. But there's also the feather quality itself, and it also takes precedence. Soft feather, hard feather. Hard feather, soft feather. And I've talked about this. I've got onto this trait a while, some years ago, and I've followed it for a number of years. And I really do see a difference in the hard and soft feather. Again, it takes a lot of almost daily involvement, touching and feeling and everything, to get the feel, to understand exactly what I'm talking about. Some guys would say, oh, you can't tell the difference or whatever. So it's hard sometimes to perceive the difference between hard and soft. Okay. We were talking about hard versus soft feather. And so I thought we'd come in here and give you a few examples of what I consider hard and soft. One of the things that you'll get with harder feathers, you'll get more sheen out of it, more iridescence out of the feather, even on the wing shield and everything like that. It's not as simple as that, but that is one of the things that kind of comes along with a harder feathered pigeon, like this little hen here, this little dark T-pattern hen. She is the type that would be more what we consider, quote, the classic 514 type. of a hen, where they're going to be probably a little later in the spin, a little higher flyers, a little stronger type of pigeon. You go the other way and you end up with a little softer feather. You end up with a bird, say like this bird right here, that has more buoyancy to the feather, and the bird has got more buoyancy, period. But the feather itself is also a coarser feeling, and the shaft of the feather has a certain thickness to the shaft that you want to see too, and all that stuff doesn't come together. It's all different, but
does light color make soft feather, Michael?
Not automatically.
Can you have a light color that can be hard feather?
You can have a dark colored bird that can be a softer feathered pigeon.
Okay.
Yes, definitely.
That's the ticket right there.
So that is, yeah, that is, and
does that loosen up the roll too, Mike?
So it has a tendency for the roll to become more up front. The birds, the gaily, lightly loaded, highly inbred pigeons, if they're done right, will have a tendency to have too much roll. I mean, but you can also inbreed and go to the dark, so that is that's why there's no set things. Why it's hard to figure out all these different options and everything, because each roll crosses over into the other area. It's hard to get it figured out. But eye sign, as you can see in here, I got quite a few white eyes mated together, white into yellow, and I don't usually make too many orange-eyed birds together or yellow-eyed birds together. I'd rather have it, and if I do mate two of them together, I like to have it where they will be able to produce a white eye. So in other words, that some of their parents were white-eyed pigeons, and I like to have that basis there. I found that the percentages come better when you stay in the white eye, the gravel eye. If you go with the orange eye, you get some tremendous pigeons, but it seems to in my lifetime of studying, it seems you don't get as many percentages, don't turn out as good. Let me go over here to the next pen and we'll see what we got sitting over here.
Okay, Mike's back now.
Okay. Pete wanted me to, and he's the man behind the camera here, so I better listen to him. He wanted me to elaborate just a little bit, touch on where and why for some of these birds came from and behind them, and because I have a few different varieties of things here, I thought at least we'd have it down for the record. A little hen like this is your classic 514 type hen, we call it, with a little bronzing on it, dark key pattern bird. That type of bird does go back to 514. It's from some of the fanciers that were the birds came down, inherited from Bill after he died. That bird would be probably 3 or 4 generations away from that particular background. Down in the bottom you can see a white bar, a blue, sometimes they call them yellow bars or cream bars, or that's the dominant opal factor. A man by the name of George Gulla, back in the 50s, knew Pensum quite well, loved the rollers, was more of into it for the show side of it, although he did fly his birds, and in those days almost all the guys showed their birds. They didn't have kit competition flies like they do today, at least out here they didn't. And so he brought in some colors and crossed them into some of Mr. Pensum's very best bloodlines, and that factor goes back to that. I've personally had that factor since 1972, and so it's just a little bit of the variety of birds that I keep and maintain to try to understand the whys and what fors of all facets, and so I try to keep a little bit of the different colors involved. At the same time, I certainly highly respect the so-called famous lines and the 272, which is called clay hen stuff, or the 255, which is the red-headed hen stuff, and other famous birds that came down from 514, 230, and 119, and numbers like that. All are represented here on my property in different facets, and so that gives little background on that. A lot of these frosted red bars and stuff like that also go back to the same Pensum background, but through a guy here or a different guy there. But most of them go right back to the birds that Bill Pensum had at one time or another. Another number in here that is 1079 would be a number that goes back to some really nice spinning birds. There'd be a bird that was down from 272 was a clay hen type of a pigeon that worked well with the 514 crosses back and forth, and have worked well that way. And those like blue check cock over there, sitting there, is a classic example of that type of pigeon. Head type on that bird is real explicit. Shows some of the lineage where he comes from. The hen he's mated to has really got a completely different head type. That's kind of what I call a clash mating. And both birds bring to the table something that's, I think, is really needed, and that particular mating seems to be working out quite well. And sometimes you don't always get what you expect, but the mix on that is just fine. This is the same type of a bird down from him. A son. It shows the aristocratic head properties. Little extra sear around the eye, this and that go back to some bloodlines that have been cultivated and inbred. A little stamp of different types, these little nuances to the head type, stuff like that, come out with certain families of birds. This here again goes back to a little cross. It's not straight, but it's got the 1079 and some of that blood that was considered to be carrying some of the high velocity traits that the Pensum birds had. Let's move on to the next pin in here. We can take a look at that. This era stuff that was imported in the late 70s, early 80s. Mr. Joe Keyser went over and visited with Mr. Harris, and then later brought some birds in, and this is a representative of some of that's been here since then.
That's some English stock then, huh?
Mm-hmm. I don't necessarily consider English all the way. Harris had kind of his separate thing a little bit from a lot of the other guys. Of course, each guy's got his own stuff, but Harris' background was a lot the same as the same background that some of the stuff that Bill brought over here. So again, to think of it as a straight outcross, in my terminology, is probably more of a line breeding and blending, really, when it comes into use. Although the type and stuff on the birds were distinct, and they had a certain type, but the very best birds displayed a certain type of wing formation and stuff that I like to see in a wing. And so anyway, the little hen standing there next to it is a little bird that I've worked that I call my triple cross stuff, because it's a blending together of different families of birds. And that particular line is kind of the result of stuff that I really like anyway. The way it's turning out really nice, and I have quite a few pairs together around that type of background.
How long did it take you to get a name set triple cross? How many generations did it take you to get that going?
The I've been working with that for about let's see, 7. This is 5. I've been working with it for about 9 years, starting with that what I call the triple cross stuff, which is I've just branded it that name because I'm actually in the process of working in a little bit more bloodlines than just a simple three birds alone and crossing them back and forth. It represents a whole family of stuff, like, say, more or less the Pinsum stuff that came through when Pinsum died. Howard McCulley had birds that went up north to Mr. Joe Keyser and to Joe Borges, and Herb Sparks involved with the birds that those men have. And then some of the Harris birds that came over, like the grizzle bar behind there. I worked some of that stuff in there, and then some red-headed hen that came from another man that made quite a splash in Southern California, name of Stuart Forsythe. Had some birds that he got from out of Frank Lavin's auction, and that's just a little bit of the background of where these birds have come from. And anyway, in my backyard here, I've kind of like a big cauldron of paint. I throw in a little yellow, I throw in some blue and some green or red, and then I kind of mix it up, and whatever kind of color it starts to take, I'll lean it one way or the other, and then we'll go after what I think is the finest blend that we can get here. And so that's what I'm at right now. I do recognize the importance of just the paper, the genetics, and that is interesting too, because after a while you have to try to figure out the importance of physical characteristics here and now, that exact eye sign, that exact feather quality, that exact keel setting, back type, muscle pattern, feather quality. All those things mean something, but then just the overall flow of genetics means something too. So in other words, even though this bird is this way, it also has an impetus or a motion genetically. So that even though the bird is here in physical stature, inside with a lot of inside makeup, what we can't see is what I'm talking about, can be carried in a family, a blood, so-called blood of the birds, so that has an importance. So that you can take two birds that are kind of off type, two birds that really didn't do so good, you can mix them together, and because the blood is known to work together, you can put birds together like that, and a lot of times have a very successful mating. Some young man wants to come here and get pigeons. I already know that this stuff and that stuff has a good blend together. I can take maybe secondary pigeons as far as some physical attributes, and they might produce birds that are even superior to the birds that I'm selecting out because they have just this type of feather or just this type of keel setting. So that's the overall impetus of the genetics of the blood, has its pull and its importance too. If you breed too much blood, then things go. If you breed too much the other way, things go. So it's to me, it's always a push back and forth on how to extract the best offspring. Again, on your mind's eyes, what we want in the air. Every person has a little different idea of what he wants in the air and what he's after, and rightly so. That's the way it should be. This is an art form. This is almost a way of life. Genetics is deep, and understanding how these birds mate and everything, with offspring coming out, and it's just it mirrors our existence, and the idea they have to deal with this role, which seems to be abnormal, hard for them to deal with, is the same way as us dealing with life and what we're existing on the planet. As far as, we seem to be trying to destroy our environment and everything. So the comparisons back and forth with their struggle to be good fly and to be good kit birds and be able to maintain the role is kind of almost the same as us getting along in society today.
Mike,
Sounds pretty good.
Mike, let's get back to the questionnaires. What breeding habits does a breeder need to have? You know, for the novices. Here we go for the novices.
Okay. Okay, what's the question again? You're gonna put it on cam? You're gonna.
Yeah.
Okay.
What breeding habits does a breeder need to have? You know, pertaining to, you know, threading, sitting on the eggs and stuff like that.
Pertaining to what? Sitting.
You know, sitting on the eggs. You know, being feeding the babies and stuff like that.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying.
Would you breed out of a bird like that?
Right. I see
A
what
bird
you're
that
saying.
doesn't respond to
Right.
natural.
Right.
Would you use a bird like that? A bird that didn't? Absolutely not, right?
Well, no, not unless you were somewhere rather put into a position where you had to have something because it was the only thing left somewhere around. I am breeding out of a couple of birds that are this little hen sitting on the nest here. Is she on an egg?
How do you get them to colonize
Um,
breeding? Because, you know, I know some friend of mine that's trying to breed them open loft, and man, he's having the worst of luck.
well, what you got to
Is it
do,
selecting
what you got.
certain do you breed for colony? You select certain birds, and what are
Well,
the requirements that they need to have?
actually, overall,
Temperament?
you have a great. In the long run, once you do have them colony bred, that they everything kind of builds up a momentum, and it's a big benefit just in itself because of they learn how to deal with each other. They tend to have more health. Everything else just kind of falls in line after a while, and colony breeding has a lot of advantages in maintenance and everything else, of course.
Do
But-
birds have to be bred for it?
They don't have to be bred for it, but if they are bred in colony, they will finally exhibit a better overall habit. They'll assume better habits. But more what you're talking about is if a bird is kept in and never bred in a colony breeding or open loft, it will sometimes not know how to have the proper manner. So it's not so much genetic; it's just the that bird's own personal experiences that he hasn't been able to. Same thing with mating the birds up. If they get used to, if a certain pair gets used to having a one of the birds does most of the work. Let's say the hen or cock. Let's say the hen wants to set on the eggs all day long. The cock will end up letting her, and then he gets lazy about it. So that, if you leave them mated together for too long a time, or if they are mated for a long time, then the cock will get to have bad habits. But so.
How long do you work a breeder before removing it from the stock loft? In other words, you try a bird, you know, the birds roll real good in the air, and you move them into the stock loft, and then how long do you work them before you say, hey, this bird's not making it?
Well, we're back from our lunch break at Carl's Jr. The natives were getting restless a while ago, so we had to give them a little break. And everyone's got their body replenished with good food from that Charbroil Charles burger. And we're ready to go again. Let's go.
Okay, Mike, in selecting a breeder, what are the requirements? You're going to elaborate a little bit on.
Yeah, we set a bird up here. We wanted to talk a little bit about different requirements, and it's very diverse. Again, I don't take any approach of a single looking to try to clone or to identically match certain traits. I always like a mix and match approach to being able to balance this roll out. To get the superstar is always a combination of bringing together of factors in my mind. This cockbird here, I brought out just to show what a good, I don't know if we can catch it on the camera, but I wanted to try to catch just a good solid gravel eye or light-eyed pigeon. If I move in closer, maybe we can get a little closer view of that. I don't know what the focal point is on that.
Let's see here. Bring it in a little bit more.
Okay.
Let's face it towards the sun.
Right
I mean,
there,
you face the
little
sun.
Little sun right there. Anyway, this is a classic type of a strong 514 type of a cock. Again, has a nice gravel eye. This eye sign is got that red, what they call
Right
the
there.
red there, kind of through the eye sign. That particular eye sign is kind of the classic, what we want to call gravel eye sign. This sign is the basic backbone, I think, to a bloodline, to a family, to the rollers in general. We have, of course, all the other more what they call pearl eye, which would be more white and not so much red in it, and then the orange eye, yellow eyes, all of those different nuances to the eye sign. And of course, we really check on how the pupil works, dilation of the pupil. The mode area around the pupil becomes, takes on different aspects. Different family of birds have different traits as far as that. Granulation and the mode area. Usually on the white-eyed birds like this, you'll have a bluish or violet color to around the eye. Sometimes that's generally involved with good-blooded pigeons, and nice breeding stock will have some of the good stock will have that in the breeders, the good stock pigeons. Sometimes it'll be a little bit more green in the yellow eye around the pupil. I call that the mode area. But anyway, I thought we'd take a little bit of a look at that, try to get a little bit of. This bird has a strong head. This has got a strong type to him. This bird represents strength and would be the type bird that could fly for quite a long time, or a bird that would have a tendency to come into the role later in the development. Wouldn't even come into the role the first year sometime. On the other hand, when you have this is an important piece of a piece of the pie, a piece of the ingredients to keep and then mix to the other side, to put it more to the early birds, put it more to the birds that have a tendency to come in early. This type of bird we call a bird that has a lot of integrity. So you use a bird with a lot of integrity to go into the birds that are right here and now, and you hopefully can get a balance some way. A lot of times you don't get it right off the bat, right from the start. You don't necessarily get the blend right. You don't make a mating and then everything is just perfectly balanced right in between exactly what you want. Sometimes you have to work with it several generations before you start to tickle it and make it work for you. If things don't work out, obviously you have to abandon your strategy and go back to the drawing board and come back from another angle. But some of the things that I'm telling you is basic, solid information that I think is important as far as the eye sign and the type of eye and some of that.
Michael, since you're talking about eye sign, does a smaller eye sign, a smaller pupil, a better pigeon?
Well,
Or
I
that's,
think
you know what I mean, the
all right,
smaller pupil, the better.
Let's get
That
into
used to be, a long time ago, they used to discuss about that. I know you're going to elaborate more on that.
right.
But since you mentioned so much about eye sign, do you find any truth to those findings?
Well, yeah, there's definitely. Let me grab this. I don't like this pigeon up here hanging up here on the wire, looking down on us. I'm gonna set him over here and grab something else and put in there.
Okay.
We'll do it. I want to focus in on this guy too here. So, what we got here is more of the what you would call classic, more white eye or pearl eye. It doesn't have quite so much red in it as the previous bird. But Reyes brought up the point of the dilation to the pupil that gets really small. and I find that that is connected with usually the bird that have a good response or reaction time. And years ago, in one of our conversations, Reyes used the term the vibrations of the eye. You could feel the vibration of the universe in there. And that is a little saying that I sticks with me still to today. I like to see the bird have that ability to flex its eye, and the birds that have a tendency to do that are the birds that sometimes possess more speed. Now that I've said that, now let me disqualify that and say that also you can get birds that won't roll right away anyway, and don't have a lot of frequency with the birds that with the pin dot type of a dilation to their eyes. Sometimes there's a lot of range in there, so that it's a good thing to see the other type of eye sign too, the eye sign that is more open. The pupil has a tendency, it still flexes, but it doesn't cut down near as small. It stays more open, and I connect that up with more of a consistent spinner, a bird that you'll see a lot of consistent birds. Say a 10-yarder would be would have more of this open pupil sign to it sometimes, a consistent 10-yarder that would roll that same distance most of the time that it would do its work. So that has the connection with more dependability to it, and there is some very good speed and nice things with that type of eye too. So again, the clashing or the bringing together of the more open sign to the dilated sign has seemed to yield some very good prospects for me, and I've had some good luck with that type of mating. Again, you try to match up as much as you can the positive things, but you can't always match everything up perfectly, so you always have to compromise, and you can't get everything done. But I think that the area around the pupil, the mode area, also has certain qualities that run with it. If you have a bird with a lot of shatter sign, sometimes it's known as the bottle cap effect. That's with a lot of black that protrudes out and goes out into the field of the eye. That seems to be with birds that are more up close with the roll, more instant, more here and now. The birds that have what I term a clean eye sign, that just have a pupil cut into the field, whatever it might be, white or orange or whatever color, that has a tendency for there to be more consistency. The shatter sign or the moat that's filled up with a lot of signing in there. The racing homer people have terminologies. If there's a little bit in front of the eye, that's standing sign. A little under the eye is sitting sign, and each little sign is kind of set up with something else. But I don't break it down like that. I look at it in a broader sense, and I like to see a little bit of that, and a lot of times the very best birds tend to have it when they're young, and as they mature, they have a tendency for that to fade and to go into a clean moat sign. And a lot of the birds that have turned out to be very good breeders for me do end up with a wide moat around the pupil, and say in a white eye with let's say a gray, blue, violet type of a color to it. Seems to be an eye that is a real positive eye sign. Johnny, what else you want to talk about?
Roll. Can it be seen in eye expression?
Well,
and
yes.
Character and temperament. Can
Right.
you elaborate a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, I've seen that I've followed the birds that roll, and you have a tendency to see certain things in the eye sign, but it's not just eye sign, it's in the temperament, it's in feather quality, it's in the total makeup of the bird, the disposition of the bird, it seems like the bird has to have the ability to deal with the role. And if they don't have that ability, it's the same way with us dealing with life. There's a lot of people that just aren't born with whatever it takes to just deal with life itself. They have a problem and they just can't seem to work it out, and they end up down on Skid Row asking for handouts in our poor, at least made-up society. But the same thing kind of happens here. The birds that seem to can't cope, they can't deal with the spin, have a tendency to show it on the ground, and you can read that with the disposition on how they hold their feathers. A lot of times they'll hold their feathers in their head, neck region, tight in some areas, loose in other areas, and all these little nuances is a lot of times a little bit of an insight to the bird's personality. So sometimes the old term snake-necked, where they hold their feathers real tight all up and down their neck. Some birds can have a little bit of this trait and still be very positive birds, but generally, if you get birds that hold their neck feathers real tight, and snake-neck devils is what some people have referred to them as, you would find it hard to breed a whole line of birds that would be pretty uptight and more nervous like that. That's just a generality, but it gives you an idea, a little idea of what we're talking about on that.
So understand. When Benson was talking about expression, he wasn't just talking about eye expression. He was talking about the all around of the pigeon, like you're saying.
Right. The bird has a sense of intelligence, and you can pick it up. One of the better ways to relate it across, I've had people challenge me and say, you can't look in the eyes of somebody and tell if they're going to be, a crook or no good or not. And yet, on the other hand, you really can. When you think about it, you can look in the eyes of some people and see distrust. And to put it over onto another plane, you can certainly see how different breeds of dogs have different attitudes and approaches. Some dogs are very hyper, and other dogs are very sleepy. Some dogs are very aggressive, and so on. So it's the same thing with our family of birds here, that certain families can have traits, and at first you don't see these personality traits and so much, but like you can maybe say with a yippy chihuahua compared to a basset hound that is slow and laying down there with his ears laying on the ground sleeping. But after you get familiar with the birds and you get studying, you will see some of these traits and how they handle their business, and it's very delicate. Sometimes you have to be careful not to mix up alertness with fear, because some birds that have great reaction time, again, that's where the speed's going to come from. The speed is going to come from the birds that have the greatest reaction time. In my days growing up as a kid, with all the westerns and everything, there was a lot of the movie stars, and there was a lot of quick draw contests where guys like Sammy Davis and some of the other stars at the time would practice drawing their guns and firing for reaction time. And I think that's what we're breeding for in the birds. We want birds that have this really quick reaction time, and so that they're sometimes very hard to catch in a pen. But once you catch them, they're very intelligent. They're not wild. They're not flighty. They're not scared anymore. They understand that you're on their side. So that's the type bird that you got to be careful and not confuse with the bird that's actually scared. Actually doesn't have the common sense, like this bird hanging up here on the wire right now.
Benson claims that he could discern how much or less roll a bird was carrying. But I also understand that Benson also claimed that he could discern how much or less quality a pigeon possessed by just studying it in the ground, is what you're talking about.
Exactly.
Can you now recognize how much roll a pigeon is carrying by not looking at pedigree, but by just examining the pigeon in the ground, how good is your comprehension?
Well, that's for somebody else to actually grade me on, to tell me how good or bad that my ability is at reading pigeons. But I will say that
Like
I
your
feel
matings, how predictable?
exactly.
Predictable, I guess. You know, if
I-
you put a pair down, how
right.
predictable, or how good
Right.
the youngsters come out now?
Right.
For you?
Of course, there's a lot of different things that can sink the boat. And again, in my estimate, shit, I can't say it. Got my teeth tangled.
Not to blow your own horn, Mike. I mean, not to blow your own horn. It's just
Estimation. My estimation is that.
It's all the way live, guys. So have mercy.
Have mercy. You're linking up about numerous hundreds of factors that go into making a bird, and you have to link everything up for it to turn out to be a champion. And all it takes is for one thing not to link up, and it blows all the rest of them that have linked up. So that you can be 90% right on your mating and still end up with a mating that doesn't work. So it's hard sometimes to. You can't really yield. You can't really take all your success or measure your worth or your success off of how many matings are right or wrong. You could be right almost all the way down the line and just have a couple of things that are strong kind of negative points line up in the mating, and you can end up with a mating that didn't work. Even though that the mating was probably a pretty good mating, and even some of those babies could end up to be very good stock birds. And that's where on the ground you can say, okay, this bird's got 90% of these things working for it. The major stumbling blocks sometimes are all lined up here. You've got a lot of things that are working on this bird, and only a couple of minor things kept it from being a superstar in the air. So that if you have that approach and that knowledge, then you can go ahead and say, I'm going to try to use this bird back in the stock loft. And generally, if you're on what I'm saying, then things will work out very good for you, and that those 90% of the things will be there in the next generation, and you'll have a lot of success with picking that bird out and using it. So whether a bird, again, it comes, you know what it comes down to? It comes down to something that got Bill Pensum in trouble a whole lot, and that was every time that he would write an article or make mention, and he'd do it all. He did it all the way up until he died. He'd go back and he'd say, why do the pigeons roll? And when he come out with and said they rolled because of epileptic fit, because that the birds were some way or other, in some people's eyes, diseased or had this defect, a lot of guys didn't want to hear that. They don't want to approach it, so they don't even want to know why the birds roll. They just don't breach that subject. But Bill kind of would challenge you and make it, because once you come to the opinion that the roll is a defect, it is something that is out of balance with nature, then when you go to mate your birds and you're breeding all the way different. You're breeding to control a roll. You're breeding to manage this roll. You're not breeding for it anymore. You're breeding a whole different strategy. You're understanding that the roll is something that can overtake the birds. It's not something that just mixes and blends right with the bird's personality. We touched on this a little before about just breeding.
Would you breed out of? Do you breed out of those birds that roll from the front of the kit only, or you do breed occasionally from those from behind the kit?
Occasionally.
That symbolize involuntary.
Right.
The ones that roll from the back of the kit are involuntary, so to speak, and the ones that roll from the front are voluntary.
Yeah.
I mean,
we talked about that.
Can you talk a little bit more since we're on this subject here?
Yeah.
Do you?
I don't necessarily
still
go
tie the
along with the
combo?
categorizing of involuntary, voluntary being from the back or from the front, but I do go along with there is a major difference on the bird's personality and his approach to his rolling life and what he's going to do in our kit. And again, it does. There's certain purposes that need to be met, and sometimes a bird that has a problem catching the kit because he's too frequent can be successfully used in a breeding program. Matter of fact, sometimes a young cock I mean, I've had young cocks in the kit that had that problem as far as being a little too frequent and turn out numerous times to be exceptional breeders. So it just goes to support my overall theory that, again, we're not trying to clone some idealistic bird. We're trying to, mix and match and come to get all these combinations together, because they won't stay together once we put them there. No matter if we breed from two ideal champions, we cannot just go on from that point. And the only thing that would support me on that is for the last 150 years or whatever, basically, guys have got into the sport trying to breed that way. The two most ideal spinners put together. If it was that easy, again, if that theory would work, we would have a lot of good teams of rollers out here, that much more than we do, and it would be a lot easier if the best bird we bred 4 or 5 years ago, we made it to the best bird that we bred last year, and then all of a sudden we had more good birds. That would support the idea that the roll is fixed, that the roll
That was the
can
philosophy
be fixed.
years ago.
Right.
But it's not like that.
That comes with more of the purest approach to bloodlines and all that. So
It's in the blood.
it's in the blood.
It's in the blood, mate.
It is in the blood. It is in the blood. But it's just it's not as easy as that. It's as complex as our existence, and that's what makes it so interesting.
That's a mouthful. Getting back to selecting a breeder, and what are the requirements? You were elaborating on eye sign, but I know you were going to get deeper into it before we started talking about the reflexes of the eye and stuff. So could you elaborate a little bit more pertaining to what are the requirements also, like the wing structure again?
Yes. Eye sign, I'll finish on the eye sign a little bit. Eye sign does follow mannerisms in the air. Certain eye sign will be there for birds that are deep, will be there for birds that come in early, will be there for birds that are late. So that I'm not going to try to describe that, but I'm just going to say, that eye sign can be directly connected to how they spin in the air.
Benson said it best when he said that eye expression has to be understood.
It's really a
Where you
neat,
can enhance your
deep
progression.
subject, right? And although, let me add this right now at this point, because I know of some other guys that knew me years ago that got all excited with the eye sign. The eye sign can be a false prophet. If you just breed for eye sign, you can end up with great eye sign without the birds doing what the eye sign says it should do. So that if the eye sign comes out in the wash naturally, then it means something. It represents something. The good things are following it. But if you just isolate in on eye sign and forget everything else, then you'll end up with a false prophet. You'll end up with a bird with a great eye sign, and yet if you really get into it, you'll be disappointed with what happens with the offspring.
False expression.
Exactly. False
it's
expression.
Just a beautiful outside genetics,
right.
color and pupil or whatever, and it's
all false because
false makeup.
Because the person has done nothing but artificially look for that. After he mates just for that and doesn't keep it all in understanding, he can create a false look.
I'm beginning to understand that the Birmingham rulers are very complicated.
Well, like I started out a while back, I said that I believe, and I know that it offends some people, but I believe that trying to breed the true Birmingham individual spinner is one of the hardest art forms there is in the world, and not too many people understand it.
Michael, since we're almost running out of time, I'm going to ask you again, what do you consider a champion spinner in your eyes, in your understanding?
Well, that's that there is.
There's so many there, but in a nutshell.
In a nutshell, even in a nutshell, it can't hardly be put in a nutshell. To me, there is no as one ideal, but again, the most revolutions per inch is something, or the most revolutions per foot is what I'm after, and to try to do that in a very graceful style. It involves speed. It involves certain things that with the makeup of the pigeon that allows it to do that, and so that's what I'm after. Now, that doesn't mean that the other things as far as depth and other varieties of spinning, true twizzling, which I haven't really seen. I used to have a line of birds that produced some Twizzlers now and then years ago, and I haven't even produced a decent Twizzler in years. I know Bill used to talk about twizzling, and I've had a couple birds that were marvelous twizzling pigeons, and that's basically the bird holding its axis. In other words, it starts to spin tight and fast like we normally see, like we think of a champion, but then we've all probably seen how they get off on tilt. Maybe they'll be off on a 60-degree angle and maintaining that same axis all the way down. Well, what happens with the Twizzler is he's able to lay all the way over on his side, maintaining the axis right in the center. So basically, if you want to see the hole through the bird, the so-called hole, you would be looking straight up, and there would be the bird with you could look straight up through it, right to the sun.
No, each pattern there.
Would be the true Twizzler. All it is the bird's spinning tight and fast. It holds its axis and it turns like this. That's what a Twizzler is. It's not a sloppy bird in the sense of what we sometimes can be termed as.
Have we gone beyond the hole, Michael? Seriously, have we gone beyond the hole? Come on. Penson said that the true champion spinner was rare in his times, rare in his last days. Do you think that we've just gone beyond the ideal spinner that Penson wrote about? In all seriousness,
some years ago, I made a statement of when that came up with all of the guys that talked about closing the hole up and the birds are rolling so fast now that we don't have a hole. I brought up the fact, well, where are the culls? Where are the secondary birds that show the hole? And it just doesn't seem to be any. I really believe that at the turn of the century, and it's going to get me in trouble.
You love
that, don't you? I love it. I'm here for that. But at the turn of the century, the sport was probably filled with men that knew more about rollers than we know today. At that time, you have to remember that they had no other electronics, no other mode of travel, that the birds were a way of life to them, and that they had cultivated them from father to son down the line. The knowledge had been passed to grandfather to grandson, and that some of these men at the turn of the century, when Bill got involved, and at that time, I think that it was probably at its peak. And then with the invent of all of our televisions and all the other distractions and everything else, and just our ability to not think on our own anymore, everything is kind of done for us. That our ability to breed good pigeons isn't as keen as it was 75, 100 years ago. Men really spent a lot of time and effort, and in a lot of ways, in my opinion, we're more intelligent than we are today. So I believe that a high-class rare spinner back then is probably even harder to get now, or just as hard anyway.
Well, Mike, we got some closing questions to ask you because we're about ready to run out of film. Got about 20 more minutes, 15. Where and when have you seen the fastest birds in your lifetime, and whose backyards have you seen the best quality pigeons in the air?
In the air. Well, I haven't been out and around the last 3-4 years much like I used to be years back. So I can only go with a number of years ago. At one point in time, there seems like rolling, like going to Vegas and playing the slot machines. I mean, everybody's going to have an outstanding individual bird here and there. So I don't think I want to.
I want more consistency.
Right. I don't think there's a couple outstanding birds I've seen here or there, but I think if I was to say a family of birds that produced outstanding, nice, smooth type of birds that got me excited, that turned me on, that got me sprung, Joe Bauer had some kits that over here in Riverside that had some nice pigeons in it that I seen in there over a period of time. A man by the name of Homer Cadero, which I have a lot of respect for, is have just outstanding flying practices. Had probably the most, say, numerous outstanding spinners over a period of years that I've dropped by and seen him. Another guy that impressed me a whole lot with a family of birds, I'd say at any one time, I'd say that in one given kit, I seen 3 birds that I would put up in the top, quality with the top 10 pigeons that I'd seen in my life. I seen at a guy's house by the name of Stuart Forsythe, had which is he's moved. No longer, that family's no longer, I think, really fully there as a whole family. Fragments of it are here and there, but I seen some really impressive spinning there. Jerry Higgins' house, I've seen over the years some of the other bloodlines. He's got a different bloodline now than what I'd seen, but years ago I'd seen some birds at his house. It's a beautiful place to view birds from. He's got a down in a canyon, and you can get up on the sides where you can almost see the birds directly from the side. And I seen some truly nice pigeons there. Up in Northern California, I've caught a few nice individuals at Mr. Keyser's house. So all those guys have had input on my ideas of what spinners look like in the air.
So these are some reputable breeders that we can refer. You can refer some new beginners to.
Well, I don't want to really sick a bunch of people onto somebody if they don't want to be, if they don't want them. But and a lot of guys, get inundated with more people than they can handle, because they can only breed so many birds or help so many people out too at the same time. But yes, I know that Homer Cadero values his kind of privacy some, and so I wouldn't just say, but
you got some birds for sale?
I hate to just run out there and do it, because.
Well, I heard on this video that you are for sale. You have birds for sale.
Occasionally I do. I have kind of a network of people that we share some stuff back and forth, and so a lot of times I don't have as much here as I'd like to have, and I'm not really too much money oriented type of a guy, and so it's selling birds is kind of secondary to me, but I like to start out somebody, and I like for somebody to come along to be a protege, to maybe pick up and to carry on some of the ideas, some of the things that I feel work and are important. So you have to go through a number of people before, maybe in your lifetime, you take your whole lifetime to meet 1 or 2 guys that might have the same attitude or the same religion, if you will, as you do towards the birds.
Mike,
Go ahead.
Mike, is there any more you want to elaborate on selecting a breeder? Is that it?
Well, actually there could be
A part 2 series?
Yeah,
part 2 series, but
part 2 series, okay.
Because there's really a lot
there's
more.
There's a lot. But I think we got a lot here. Do you want to share some more stuff?
One more thing, since we're running out of tape. Who are some of the men you would like to really give thanks to, or inspired you to lean towards a certain family of pigeons that you really looked up to these men, that these birds are really good and this is what you like to continue with? So who'd you like to give thanks to?
Well, I mean, I would like to give thanks to Homer Cadero, number one. I mean, just personal knowledge and contact with somebody that I respect. There's been other people that I've got birds from that the birds have done me good, but the type thing that I'm going to give real final, all the way positive feelings about is somebody that has got a lot of integrity and has you know, the birds have also showed it. And like I said, Homer Cadero would be one man. Another guy would be Joe Keyser. He's probably got one of the best eyes around. He doesn't even know it yet. As soon as he gets a little bit more, I say as soon as he gets a little bit more, he's got a ton of knowledge up there, but sometimes he's been afraid to turn it loose. And the more I know him and encourage him to, the more I'm impressed with his ability to read pigeons and to see pigeons. Another man that left a mark on me, not with his pigeons, but just with his overall grace, was Grover Chandler. You know, I was very pleased with him. In my pursuit of the California Classic, which I started as some kind of a guiding light, hopefully for the individual spinners, for the birds that, for something to show people, to get more onto the positive side of individuality and not get it tangled up with with kit competitions. John Vandenbroek played a very important role in all the politicking and all of that it took to get the classic going. It's I don't know, it's in about its 5th year or something right now, and it's really nice to be able to see an event that brings together people from, or even around the world. We've had birds entered in there from England and from all around the United States, and to put them side by side and fly them out, and to have a $5,000 prize fund or so at the end of the thing, and to see this money cause the excitement and all the history and everything involved around that's been super exciting. And John Vandenbroek it was my dream, my conception, but he's the instrument that really made it possible. He was the driving force that was able to knock heads with everybody and make it happen. There is other people that I respect a lot, but right now I don't want to get into a long list of everybody that I've ever known. But
I mentioned everybody.
But anyway, that would be off the top of my head right now. Some of the people that meant something one way or the other. Some people I've learned a lot off of from the other side of the fence, from watching some negative things about their birds. Maybe too many roll downs, too much this and that. Studying how they're breeding and how the birds are doing and why the birds are doing this and that. And I've learned more from my own mistakes per se than from my ideal champions, or so-called ideal champions.
Well, Mike, me and Johnny Reyes would like to thank you for inviting us over, having you share with us your thoughts and theories about the Birmingham Rollers. And maybe we get a little preview of what's going to go on in Part 2 series.
Yeah.
No, that's enough. Thanks a lot, Mike, and we'll see you next time.
Part 2 on the same day. I'm back.
We're on our way out the door. We just came back for more.
What we wanted to touch on here is some other factors and one of the things that seems to intrigue Mr. Reyes is the wing structure. The wing structure is also like eye sign. It's something that is maybe a little of an indicator of things to come. First of all, the skeleton shape or the bone structure of the wing, on how it's connected, and the joints and the joint links in the wing are important. And that's what we can see and feel for is the first joint, of course, is right up here, high up, right here at the base of the neck. And then what we normally, a lot of times I'm holding a bird, I find that the two tits of the birds where the second joint is made. And I like to feel that a little width between there. I don't like to see it just up here with a hollow back high, and I don't like to see these two, this actually the second joint, to way down, too far down. I like to see it more up towards the front of the pigeon and set across a little wide through here. And what that refers to is the shorter joints in the wing. The first joints seem to be a little shorter, and the muscle is set in such a way that you get a certain configuration where you can feel the angles of how this wing fits to the pigeon. And it just takes common sense that if you have too long of joints here in the first part of the wing, then it's going to take a longer stroke. If you have a shorter joints here in the wing in here, you get a quicker stroke. Now, that's just the skeleton shape. Then what goes along with it is actually the curve to the wing, the cupping to the wing. The feather itself also takes on that aspect of how the feather is, the shaft of the feather is let's say bent or cupped or curved, and all that has a certain thing to play out. The feather itself can be wider, harder, softer, and by viewing this, if you get too much width to each individual feather, you end up with what I call a paddle wing, a wing that catches a lot of air and can't get rid of it. And you also end up with birds with extreme size and have a tendency to throw bigger babies, birds that are coarse and too wide in the feather. So we get what we usually hear the other side of the story with the finger feathers. But if you can get them too narrow and too refined too, where the shaft is too limber and the feather itself is too weak to really be able to propel the bird and to put the brakes on and to be used right. Some of the feather qualities follow the bird's ability to just be a sound athlete. In other words, a sickly type of a bird that's not strong and healthy, sometimes doesn't possess the real healthy feather, the real quality feather. So it kind of follows. But what I like to see a cupping to the wing, where the wing has a little bit of cup to it, so that the wing itself is nice and neat and small, where you get a rounded effect to the wing here. And I think about it, the bird using the wing in half stride when he's rolling, when he's using his wing, he's not opening his wing all the way up like this. He's using his wing in a half cup motion across the front of him, and so that it's already almost fixed in that position. And then how the bird uses his muscles is very important too, to tie down, and this is where the breast muscle comes in. Of course, the breast muscle drives the wing, and so when the bird uses its wing, its temperament is also connected here to the ability of him to fight the roll or to be too excited. And so I like to see a certain calmness in the way that he presents his wing to me. When I open his wing up and see his wing, I want to see it demonstrate a certain present his wing to me in a way that it's not fighting me, and it's not trying to be too hard or too drastic.
And that's not necessarily meaning that the wing, that it has weak muscles. It's just the way it's set.
Exactly.
Okay.
The way that it's set, and then the temperament of the bird also plays a very, very important part that is involved with how it demonstrates its wing to you.
Yeah.
If it's too hard, a lot of guys, in particularly years ago, always wanted to see a lot of iron strength to the wing, where you lift it out and it just rip it back, thinking that was. But those are the type birds that a lot of times fight the roll too. Every now and then you get a certain great.
Yeah, John Reyes does that a lot. He's wrong.
A great
Maybe
bird.
he's wrong.
So actually, a bird that has a supple secondary area. Now the primary area, I like to see a wing that actually collapses in on itself, where the inside pulls out and the outside pulls in. And this bird kind of demonstrates it right here. Although this bird does not have the best wing. I'd much rather have a different bird up here if I was trying to show you the most ideal wing. But this is the type thing I like to see. I like to see the wing collapse in on itself when you pull it out. Not pull from the outside in, but pull from the inside out, so that this comes in and this.
Like a graceful return.
Right, but I want to see this collapse in on itself. As you can see, the secondaries pull to the center, and the primaries pull to the center, not the whole wing pulling in to the body. And
That takes a lot of breeding.
it takes a lot of different facets to the bird's
Don't they
personality.
get that way when you breed them low wing butt?
Again, we're
High
talking
wing
about
butt
we're talking about the shape of the wing,
Okay.
which goes back to old ancient heredity. Goes back to the beginning, and if you get a certain cupping and quickness to the shape of the wing, then it follows. In other words, the offspring are going to be followed, are going to
Okay.
take on more
Okay.
certain traits.
Okay, and these are the things you look for.
And these are the things you look for, and
In a breeder.
it's almost like eye sign.
Wow.
Some
Just a whole
you
bunch
can
of
get-
things, huh?
You can get involved with. A lot of times, some of the feathers have a little tit on the end of them here, where as the feather comes down, you'll see certain birds that have a real luxurious feather quality will have that type of feather there on the tip, and then you can get the waffling in the wing. Now, as you see the waffling here in the feather, I don't know, maybe
Yeah, I
you
can
can
see
kind
it.
of see it. Okay, that has a tendency to slow the birds down. So, in other words, when you get feather like that has a lot of waffling in it, the birds can fly a little slower. When they just up there more like a kite, they'll almost float and have more resistance. That's why the thickness to the front of the wing and everything is also important. But I think we're about ready to cut this off, so I'm gonna.
I was gonna ask you something real important. When the bird is rolling, do the wings go all the way up and all the way down? Remember in Hershey's tape, they only go so far now?
Finished talking about was the thickness of the leading edge, and again, that has to do with the cupping and how the bird uses the air. If the feather if the wing is narrow and hard and smooth and shiny, it cuts like a jet plane. It cuts more through the air. If it's a little bit more width, like the old biplane with a lot of roll over the top edge and up to then it gets a little bit more float out of its wing. And for our purpose, unlike a racing homer, we want to get more of a float
All
out.
kinds of stuff, huh? Yeah, all
we want
kinds of stuff.
we want to get more of a float out of the bird, so that again, what it's talking about is the type feather that gives us more float to the pigeon, and so that the study of the wing is very important. But again, I think it's good to throw in right at this particular time is that you're working with Mother Nature. What you're trying to do is to try to learn Mother Nature's secrets. You can't just build a pigeon the way that you want to do it. You have to study of all Mother Nature, try to study all of what is out there, and then you know what maybe is possible, what's not possible, and then you start to look for those traits, and you work within that framework. You cannot just find something abstract and say because I want a bird with a short beak or something that I'm going to breed champions with short beaks. It has to be compatible with what the history, the rootstock of where rollers came from. So, anyway, I'd kind of stop. I want to put a little cap on that subject. We'll probably get into that on two. I think Johnny, you had something to wanted.
When the bird is rolling, back then people believe that the wings go all the way up, and then when they're flapping all the way up
Right.
and all the way down, they produce the H pattern. But now we've learned through camera work that it doesn't. The wing doesn't go out.
Well,
Can you elaborate on that?
Well, I've said that for long, to cave in on itself and to kind of be naturally, easily just set in this position, because that's the position we have to have it in to possess the best power in the spin move.
So the wing beak